Good morning. Today is February 25th, 2019. We're here at San Diego State University at the Language Acquisition Resource Center interviewing our guest speaker, Paulo Sanjines Barreiro. Good morning, Paulo.
Good morning, Cassia. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, thanks
Happy
for
to
coming.
be here. Thank you.
All the way from southern Bahia in Brazil to be here with us today. And he has an upcoming lecture, actually, and it's an open invitation to the whole entire university. He will be talking about climate change and adapting to climate change, ecosystem governance in Brazil. So, Paulo, tell us a little bit about your trajectory and how you are here today and talking about environmental issues and challenges in Brazil.
Sure.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I was born in São Paulo, Brazil, and quickly left the country to go live in Bolivia, where I was raised. My mother is Bolivian. And I studied environmental biology in Beloit College in Wisconsin. I started with biochemistry, but quickly decided that that was not my path because I like to be with people. I like to not only interact, but also be involved in the development of communities and how they interact with their environment. And after I studied university, I went back to Bolivia and worked in Santa Cruz, which is department, that's how we call it, in eastern Bolivia. So it's a valley of where I worked. It's around 1,000 meters above sea level, all the way up to 2,000 meters above sea level. It's a protected area that was recently established. It's already going to be 12 years that that protected area is there, and that made a huge difference in my trajectory because that was the first time coming out from university that I was in the quote-unquote real world. And I was able to see, in fact, how the decisions were made on the ground. So it's a funny story. I was walking on one of my first mornings in my new home in Pucará, which is around 2,000 meters above sea level, very small community, around 2,000 people. And as you can imagine, rural area, Bolivia, you have a lot of agriculture, you have cattle ranching, not as much, but you do have that. And I was walking down one of these roads and this farmer yells at me, tells me like, get out of the road, the cows are gonna trample you. And that was funny to me because that was my first interaction with a local. And he also laughed, so we started talking about his life there and what he used to plant and so forth. And one thing he told me really changed the way I view things with environmental conservation. He tells me when we were walking about his fields and his production and so forth, and suddenly this bird's parava frente roja, it's a red-headed macaw, passes by, and this is an endemic species, only found in that region, and it's currently under extinct. It's about to get extinct. And I explained that to him. I explained that we only have this bird in this region, and that we are very lucky to have that. And he's just like, we're not lucky at all. In fact, this bird is one of the main reasons I have problems with my crops. And I usually hunt them and kill them.
Wow.
So I had studied ecology and environmental conservation for 4 years. But this man, in a couple of words, explained to me what the link between his own economic development and the way he was managing his land was getting head to head with biodiversity conservation and what that meant for his livelihood and what that meant for the ecosystem. So I started to recognize that environmental conservation is more of a tool of communication. So I studied ecology, but I do not expect this man, for example, to recognize the value of the things that I studied. But I also understood that the only way I could make a difference was to learn how to communicate environmental conservation in economic terms and in more of day-to-day decision-making terms. So after my time in Santa Cruz, where I worked also as the director, I was first as a technician and then I worked as a director of this park. It's 175,000 hectares. Not sure how big that is in acres, but that really gave me the opportunity to interact with policymakers, with the people that were taking decisions at a province level, and interact with the farmers. Then I went to do my master's at Yale University at the forestry school, and this is where I started to dive deeper into ecosystem services and ecosystem governance. Ecosystem services is a relatively new framework, and combines economic tools, economic valuation tools, with policy making decisions, and ecology, of course. And ecosystem governance is the way that, for example, market-based solutions like payment for ecosystem services. Just a quick example, in the Catskill Reserve in New York, around 20 years ago now, they were making a decision whether they would be implementing gray infrastructure solutions, so build a new filtration building that will allow us to filtrate enough water for 9 million people, and that cost around $8 billion plus annual fees for maintenance.
Sure.
Compared to going for a green infrastructure solution. So protecting the watershed and being able to offer good quality water to 9 million people just by the protection and management through co-management, I would say, through the municipality and the people living in that watershed. And that cost $1.7 billion.
Wow.
Easy decision to make, very practical, and long-term has given them many secondary benefits. So if you look at the other side, gray infrastructure usually give you secondary impacts besides carbon dioxide emissions. And that was something I studied in FES, in Yale. How can you not only recognize the value of that ecosystem, its functions, but also how do people themselves manage that area? So you have the municipality, you have the water company, you have the people living there, and eventually you have the people that are being benefited, so all of the users.
Right.
And from there, I moved to Southern Bahia after Rio Plus 20. I was there for...
When was that, Rio Plus 20?
2012.
12, okay.
Yeah. Very, very important time to go back and see how we've moved since 1992, the ECO 92 convention, where we first discussed about biodiversity and started establishing goals, moving towards a climate change world, which is something that is increasingly being talked about. As we now understand a bit more about what that will be like. And when I was there, I knew two things: that I wanted to go back to Brazil, go back to my roots and, get to know its culture and be next to the water, be next to the ocean. something that you guys will understand being studying here.
Yeah.
And my friend told me about Southern Bahia and an NGO that I worked with for 6 years called Floresta Viva. And their work is basically a three-part. It's ecological restoration, environmental education to promote forest conservation-based economy, which is something that I had been looking at throughout my career, and community engagement. Now, Southern Bahia, I got there, of course, and after my first 5 months contract, I decided that I was going to stay there for as long as I could. I started.
So that happened in 2012.
That was 2012. That was 2012. And I started working with first payment for ecosystem services scheme. So I tried to put my knowledge into use. And now the difficulty about these market-based conservation tools are that it's easy for you to recognize the issue and who is being impacted and who could be benefited from this. It is difficult for you to find people that are willing to pay for this service.
I see.
Just to give a brief example for those who don't understand what ecosystem services are, if you have a watershed where you have people living in the spring, up in the headwaters of this watershed, that are starting to use the land in impactful ways, like deforestation for cattle, or even monoculture, or anything that could decrease the quality of the soil. That in the long run, or even short term, depending on how the ecosystem is at the moment, can impact the downstream benefits. So in Bolivia, I was part of a payment for ecosystem services establishment on a community that had deforested, exactly what I'm explaining. They had deforested the top part of it for cattle because they needed more money.
Right.
And the community at the bottom used that water for agricultural production.
Oh, wow.
Around 3 years after they started going through those land use changes, the community below saw that they were not getting, during the dry season, they were not getting enough water, even if they dug. It's like, it's not, they're used to dug some sort of like pools so that they could reach a little bit lower on the, to get water, right? And eventually, they didn't even have that. So they got together with the police and marched up to that community on the upper watershed to tell them to stop deforesting immediately.
Wow.
Otherwise there would be conflict. And this is when they started establishing this payment for ecosystem services project that is still running, and it's based with capacity building for beekeeping and honey production.
Oh, nice.
And also whatever else they thought they needed. So if they didn't want to learn how to do honey, they could get compensated by having materials for their land. And this compensation works so that if you get, let's say, 10 boxes for beekeeping, you would be willing to conserve 10 hectares of your land.
I see.
7 years afterwards, after they implemented this project, they started seeing drastic changes, and now the water is running again. And these are the kind of mechanisms that you need somebody that pays. In this case, it was the people from the lower community, and somebody that is willing to accept, right? So the problem in places like Southern Bahia is that people are willing to accept a price that may be a little bit higher than what the people that may be able to give can. So
what exactly is happening?
What is happening at the moment there, it's conservation through environmental education, mainly trying to create more awareness in the population. Ecological restoration being done by NGOs like Floresta Viva and others, even through farmers who are willing to plant on their land. And lots of
Do they collaborate? Do you have any examples of people who had gone through an issue with, for instance, water that was not running anymore, or that had to collaborate with another group of
sure.
people who also work the forest?
Okay, so first let me explain a little bit about Southern Bahia's history. Like,
yes.
you know, so Southern Bahia, it's a region. If you look at the map, it's right in the middle of the coast of Bahia, of the state. And Southern Bahia has an ecological corridor that runs from the Yuna municipality, southern of Ileos. So if you look at a map and you find Ileos city, you would see a reserve on the south, another park in Ileos, and the Serra do Conduru State Park right in the middle of the corridor, where Serra Grande, the village that I'm speaking about, is. And northern of that, it's Itacaré. So all of those 4 municipalities are within one ecological corridor. Now, the reason this ecological corridor works, for those who are not familiar with what an ecological corridor is, imagine a highway for animals and plants that is safe for them to just come up and down and populate it. The reason this ecological corridor works is because of the cacao plantations. So Ileos is best known for its cacao production from the early 20th century all the way to 1988. I'm going to explain why briefly. In the early 20th century, they continued planting cacao in the way that the cacao was meant to be, under the shade of native trees, and accompany that cacao plant, the cacao tree, with other fruit trees. And this is called a cabruca system. It's an agroforestry system, no, the way we know it now, but it's called cabruca, and it's been used for centuries in that region. Now, because you have a good forest structure that allows, for example, a monkey like the Leontopithecus chrysomelas, which is the golden-headed monkey, tamarind, he is able to use this cacao forest as its living room, kind of thing. So he goes there, relaxes, meets up with other tamarind monkeys, eats the fruit that is under the canopy, and is able to move from one primary forest, like the Una Reserve, to another primary forest, like the state park, where they breed.
Oh, I see.
So this is why the agroforestry system in this region specifically works so well as an ecological corridor, works so well as carbon sequestration forest as well, and provides a myriad of ecosystem services. And this has not been valued yet. The process to value ecosystem services is something that requires a lot of resources, because you have to look at the biophysical aspects of the ecosystem, not only value it through the perception of the people, but understand in fact how much water is getting out of this specific type of ecosystem, and if that water is going to a population, how many people are getting served by it. And this takes many different types of professionals, all the way from ecologists, economists, hydrologists, and going very specific into it. ecosystem services in that region are rich. It's a very biodiverse region. In fact, it's the third most biodiverse region in the world.
Really? Wow.
For plant species. This was found by Wade Thomas from the New York Botanical Garden and was published in 1992. This publication gave the chance to the region to create the park because, and this is something that is to be very commended about this region. From the early 90s, the whole 1992 eco movement that happened from the Rio Convention, got many people interested in preserving the Atlantic forest.
Yes.
And for those who may not know, the Atlantic forest at the moment is one of the most vulnerable biomes in the world. And if you see who lives there, it's unbelievable that it's being treated this way. You have huge cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro right in the middle of the Atlantic forest, which is at the moment, from current studies, 14% from its original land, forested land.
Really? 14?
14%.
Wow.
Right. And it's still there. It's an ecosystem that, like I said, is very vulnerable, and it serves millions of people in Brazil, but it's not properly managed, is not properly looked at by the government. This is not uncommon, even more for South America. But when you look at Southern Bahia, you have a huge swath of primary forest, secondary forest, forests like this Caburca system that are being taken care of not only by the many NGOs and environmental activists, but also by the farmers.
Which is great, right?
Exactly. It's fantastic
They
to
bought
have
into the whole entire... Would you say that they bought into the idea of preserving?
I would say they understand it much better than lots of environmentalists. Because they live it. It's and this is something I realize, and this is why I always want to work with the rural area. They have an easier way to understand the benefits of having the canopy forest for their production. And this is shown also by many studies done in the region. There are some farms that have high biodiversity in their cacao forest, and at the same time are able to produce one of the highest amounts of cacao in the region. That being compared with monocultures, so irrigated cacao right under the sun, that should produce even more. Of course, long term is going to degrade the soil. But compared to this cacao forest, actually is almost the same in terms of production. Now, the farmers understand that if they keep this kind of forest, they're going to have better climate climate inside this system, which gives them enough humidity, it gives them enough nutrients, and it gives them food for their family, which is extremely important. Now, this region, talking about climate change and other sorts of impacts, is vulnerable because of not only current government decisions, but previous government decisions that are, for example, trying to build a railway from a very far away mine in Bahia still, all the way to a port that
On the coast?
that is right in the middle of this ecological corridor that I was talking about. It's called Porto Sul. And this is back in 2007 when they started talking about this. Of course, the mining companies, which want the support of the people, started to talk about this as the development project for the whole region, bringing thousands of jobs and not only economical development, but technological development and so forth. And even though my tone is a bit sarcastic, and it's because it's a it's a more of an, sometimes it's a very emotional topic to me. This is something that has been systematically brought about in many regions like Southern Bahia. The difference being that Southern Bahia has developed an awareness. I wouldn't say the general public, but many important people in that region have created a movement that is strong enough so that the National Environmental Agency, for example, Brazilian National Environmental Agency, IBAMA, and others like the public ministry fully support fully support stopping or at least closely evaluating this project.
Really?
Since 2007, nothing has happened aside from the constructions farther inland. That being said, Bolsonaro's government is definitely going to try to put that forward. And I'm not really judging their decisions. It makes sense for the type of government that they proposed to the Brazilian population and which was voted by the Brazilian population. So if we look at those things, this is something that has to happen. And this is the moment where citizenship, to my mind, comes alive. Like, we decided for this government to come, and this government is making decisions that may affect us long term. What are we going to do? Right? And basically, that is something that makes me stay in Southern Bahia, to promote this type of awareness, to continue showing the economic value of the ecosystems versus this kind of huge infrastructures that long term only bring secondary impacts, not only to the region's ecological health, but to human health. For example, they're going to be bringing iron ore from that mine all the way to the coast. That is shown to be very harmful to our respiratory system. Just a tiny example of what would happen, aside from everything that happens when you bring a mine development situation to a region like this. And something that moved me from working with that NGO towards working with bringing people to experience nature in a still pristine place like Southern Bahia. And one of the reasons that I'm here at SDSU, it's because I met Dr. Larkins and her students, wonderful students, last year. And not only they showed me the SDSU spirit, they showed me their enthusiasm and their warmth and their willing to serve, you know, to be good to themselves and to be good to others. And that inspired me to try to establish a bridge with the university and Southern Bahia. So if we are able to get more students to come and do research, to come and intern with us, not only will you experience firsthand what I'm talking about and what people over there, the warriors over there, are trying to do to secure that forest, but you will hopefully learn enough to go out to the world or even stay in Southern Bahia and continue helping in this climate change situation where we have to adapt, we have to mitigate these impacts, and we have to learn how to take care of ourselves. Just as a closing point on that,
Sure.
I see Southern Bahia as a laboratory for developing conservation technologies, developing a forest-based economy for the tropics. And when you look at the possible climate change impacts that we're going to get, this is highly important, because if we don't have these hotspots of ecological health and economical health, in the future we are going to look into such a chaotic, and I don't want to be too grim, but it's accelerating in the way that we have to think about how to adapt to severe droughts, to floods.
Yeah.
And where are all of these millions of people going to go? And how are we going to think about the future way of using our land? So once again, Southern Bahia, to me, to my mind, and to the mind of many people that have stayed there to fight for that place, it's a true laboratory for us to think about future. How are we going to build an ecosystem-based future that it's going to bring us well-being and be in harmony with nature?
So we would like to talk a little bit about environmental activism and best practices and best models.
Sure.
What can you share with us?
Well, from my experience on the ground, I've seen that the best way to be active, at least with sustainability, is for you to gather an interdisciplinary team, people that are able to look at different angles on that same issue, and to be as creative as possible with solutions that are in tune with what's going on the ground. So I've also looked at many projects that come with the recipe on what sustainability should look like in this region. And that's a very scientific based and very matter of fact way of doing it, besides of being completely disconnected at times from what the reality is on the ground. So best models are those that are created locally, are communicated and agreed upon by the community, and that are taken by the community. So it's like a startup in a way. You have a good idea and you understand how you want to walk about it and where do you want to reach. But if you don't have the understanding of the people around you, you won't really move forward, and many times that becomes only a way for you to sell good pictures and good data. I'm not saying that it's the data that you need to conserve. It's just good data that the people that are financing these projects need. So it's a very sad scheme to use. It's just marketing. So a good type of project is what I said. It has to be true to the community and true to what the environment is telling you. And this is why you need a very interdisciplinary team to work on that. Now,
And how hard is that to put a team together to come and develop?
it's very hard. It's one of the toughest things that you can do. I worked at the World Resources Institute before going back to Bolivia, and I was in dreamland. We have people from all sorts of walks thinking about ecosystems, thinking about transportation, thinking about economy, policy, and drafting fantastic papers. I love their work. And when I went to Bolivia and Brazil, in general, in Southern America, and I'm guessing in other parts of the world as well, the toughest thing is for you to get good professionals that are willing to listen, first of all, and through this listening and dialogue to co-create something that makes sense for the population, not for the people that are going to give you money. Something that makes sense for the population. The money will come eventually. And this is one of the reasons as well, and sort of like jumping into
the advice for students who are currently studying sustainability.
Exactly. Which is this. You can know a lot coming out from university. You can learn tons about ecology. You can learn tons about what sustainability means and what it looks like in many case studies. Now, being on the ground, it's a very humbling experience. As a university student, and I'm pretty sure that many, if not all of you, understand that you have decided to work with people that are an intricate part of that ecosystem. You have decided to work with families. You have decided to work with governments that may not always have a willing ear or understanding of what you're talking about. So it's going to be frustrating at the beginning, and you're going to need to find those partners, those friends, those colleagues that help you move through it. So sustainability, to my mind, and this is the advice that I will share with you, has to do a lot with the way you develop your own self as a human being. Because we're talking about an eventual global climate change that is going to impact billions of people in ways that we don't really understand at the moment fully. And first of all, you have to learn how you yourself cope with this kind of environments that are filled with risk, environments that are filled with uncertainty. How do you cope with that? And after having that on your own system, having integrated where you're going, and this is something that you do through experience working on the ground, move forward, and even though it may sound a bit cliche, get your ego out of the way. I see many of the talks being held at the different environmental conferences, and even conversations with academia at higher levels of a higher levels of interaction between academia and government and so forth, being nothing but ego. People are more concerned about getting recognition about what they're saying, that how is that really going to change the things that farmers have to deal on a daily basis. So yeah, that's it. That's my advice.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.